Hi, I'm Louisa, and this is Any Job Can Be a Climate Job, the podcast about making an impact on the planet from wherever you work. In this episode, I'm talking with Jaclyn Wegner, Senior Director of Conservation Action at the Shedd Aquarium. Now, when you think of the Chicago River, you're probably not picturing beavers, herons, and turtles. But they're there, thanks to people like Jaclyn. She's leading efforts to restore urban nature, proving that even a busy city can make space for wildlife. She's getting people to rethink what's possible, whether it's getting restaurants to ditch plastic or turning kayaking into a conservation tool. In this episode, we're going to talk about how aquariums are doing way more than just housing fish, how to find your climate superpower so you can make a difference in your own job, and why shifting the way we see nature is the first step to protecting it. This one's full of great ideas and real-world examples. So let's get into it. But before we dive into the incredible conservation work that Jaclyn leads, I want to start with a story that reveals her deep connection to the environment. Back in 2018, Jaclyn embarked on an 1,100-mile, 2-week bike trip around Lake Michigan, camping along the shores and experiencing firsthand the beauty and the challenges of one of the Midwest's greatest national treasures. Hi, Jaclyn. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. So let's start with that bike trip. 1,100 miles and 2 weeks around Lake Michigan. Can you tell us about that experience and how it shaped your perspective on conservation and the Great Lakes?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving me a chance to share a little bit about that adventure. I saved up a bunch of PTO so that I could spend over 2 weeks biking around Lake Michigan. But it took me, about a year to plan the trip. I had to book campsites and plan routes, and it gave me just such a chance to get to know the Lake Michigan ecosystem. And there are 4 states that I had to cut through as part of the journey. So I started in Chicago, briefly cut through Indiana. There's a bit of a shoreline there. That's where actually the only national park in our region is. It's Indiana Dunes National Park that I got to cut through. And then I went up through Michigan and down through Wisconsin. So it was a counterclockwise trek. And I did get rained on a couple times, but I had no flat tires. I got to meet people along the way. Some of them thought I was crazy, and some were, I think, maybe a little bit jealous or inspired to do something like that themselves. And I loved every minute of it. It was a really cool accomplishment and a cool adventure along the way.
Yeah, I imagine I'm one of the ones who are a little jealous and inspired. That sounds like a lot of fun and also really hard. Do you feel like that trip changed how you see conservation or anything to that effect?
Well, I think especially I live right in Chicago. And so, we have a lot of amazing parks here in Chicago, but they're in little pockets of our city, and you have to kind of, often leave your neighborhood, go to a park. And I'm aware of Lake Michigan, and we have Lake Michigan beaches right here in Chicago, but getting to spend just really immersive time on the shores of Lake Michigan and getting to see it from so many different angles, including, up in Michigan, there's some really hilly, parts of the trails and parts of the shoreline. So just having a really immersive experience with this huge, amazing, beautiful freshwater resource was just so different from just a day trip to the beach. And so I really value just that deeper time with it.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people get the opportunity to spend as much time in nature, and it's really special.
Right.
So for the last 10 years, you've worked at Shedd Aquarium, and then 5 years before that at Lincoln Park Zoo, managing their public programs. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and upbringing. What kind of shaped this love for nature and science?
Yeah, I grew up playing outside all the time, as much as I could with my siblings and my neighbors, and just loved getting to play outside. And I'm really grateful for those experiences. I know that they have shaped my life and have kind of, sparked my interest in science and biology. Yeah, I'm really grateful for time spent outdoors throughout my childhood. And then I ended up studying biology and chemistry as an undergrad and didn't really have a plan for it, but just was, continuing to follow that curiosity and interest in nature and science.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that got me there.
Okay. Okay. Is there a specific animal or habitat that you feel deeply connected to?
Oh, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is river otters because they
Oh,
are returning to the Chicago area, but are still very rare. And so I just feel like they capture a lot of people's hearts. They're also very curious and playful animals. So I can kind of relate to them as like just another playful creature.
yeah.
Really inspired and hopeful that we continue to see more of them around the Chicago area.
Yeah. River otters is not something I'd expect to see if I go visit Chicago. And that's really cool that you have them there.
And you may not, but recently there are like camera traps around the Chicago area, and they've been picking them up on camera traps. So while it's hard for us, and when we're going on hikes or just going to local parks to see them, we're at least
Hmm.
getting eyes on them through those camera traps, which is really exciting.
That's really neat. That's neat. And so how did you find yourself working in zoos and aquariums? Was that part of the degrees in biology and chemistry?
Yeah, you can kind of tell as we're talking about like our favorite animals and favorite ecosystems and all these things, like, you know, zoos and aquariums are a really interesting kind of organization to work at because they have these animals on site in their care for people to see up close and connect to. And so, I studied biology, and then I had always been working at summer camps and things kind of during high school and college. And so, when I graduated undergrad, I ended up, working in informal science education. I got an internship at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry doing some education programs. I had a short stint at SeaWorld as an educator.
Hmm.
And so, I kind of found myself in these kind of like informal learning institutions and saw how fun it was to, watch people connect with animals directly and use that spark to inspire them to want to learn more about those animals and learn more about where they live and their ecosystems and their biology and their adaptations. And so I think that's kind of where I took my excitement and curiosity around biology, and found a place working in this zoo and aquarium industry where I get to kind of leverage um, and utilize all of the animals that are here for educational purposes and to spark curiosity and conservation.
Yeah, that's really neat. That's something I hadn't thought deeply about before I chatted with you initially, Jaclyn, is, you know, I feel like there's kind of a misconception people might have about aquariums and their role in conservation. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think a little bit about my upbringing, and I think a lot of people could probably relate to like growing up going to zoos and aquariums as maybe like a school field trip or maybe like a family trip every year or every few years. And zoos and aquariums are great for that, like family or group experiences to get out and have like a fun time together. But what I've been building at Shedd Aquarium, and what I think is continuing to build across our industry, is a lot more of what's going on beyond just the aquarium or zoo itself, and that's conservation work out in the field, out in communities. And so it is, kind of an interesting evolution when we look back to kind of the history of zoos and aquariums of just having animals on display. And I think that our industry for many decades at this point has really been shifting to not only have animals on display, but also find ways to protect, preserve, conserve the wild animals that are kind of the cousins of the animals in zoos and aquariums. So how can we learn more about um, these amazing species in our care so that we can actually better protect and conserve their habitats and wild populations as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. By getting people exposure to these animals and learning more about the habitats, they're able to build empathy and understand them and understand the importance in preserving them.
Hmm. And I think the zoo and aquarium industry, like, certainly sees that as our opportunity and our responsibility to do that. To educate people about these animals, but then to provide opportunities for action and ways that we can kind of, take that beyond just the zoo or aquarium visit.
Right. Yeah. And Shed has such a beautiful mission. It's sparking compassion, curiosity, and conservation for the aquatic animal world. Hmm. I love that.
Yeah, it really does speak to, what we're talking about, that an aquarium is a pretty accessible place for people to visit. You don't need any special expertise or experience. We have newborns to seniors who come to the aquarium, and whoever comes through the door, we hope that their experience is going to at least spark that compassion and curiosity. And for those who are ready and interested and have the motivation, we also want to meet them with ways that they can take action too. And that's where that conservation piece comes in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell us about your role in integrating conservation into that mission. What are you up to at Shedd?
Yeah, I am really grateful. I get to oversee a cool team called Conservation Action, and we play that role really in connecting people to action opportunities. And so a lot of our work actually does happen outside of the aquarium itself. We're
Mm-hmm.
working at many sites around the Chicago area to both restore aquatic habitats and benefit aquatic species. But we also do that through engaging communities, school groups, corporate groups, so that we're also kind of changing like heads and hearts as we do that. So it's really kind of that dual purpose of improving the environment, but also building community and kind of building personal commitment to being part of sustainability as well.
Yeah, and you kind of help shape this role at Shedd, is that right?
Yeah, when I came on the team at Shedd about 10 years ago, there had already been a legacy of the Shedd team hosting beach cleanups. There's a cool little beach close to the aquarium where Shedd staff would either just the staff go or get some volunteers to go do beach cleanups. And
Okay.
that continued to kind of grow. And it was a great opportunity. And when I came on board, I was able to really expand to more sites, to more types of groups to come and join us for those action days, and really build like, I don't know, kind of more engagement and more community building into it too. So it's like about doing the beach cleanup. It's about people like meeting their neighbors, meeting conservation
Mm.
experts from the aquarium, and kind of just building that like connective tissue that is really important when you're getting people to contribute to helping fix like challenging environmental issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do really like the emphasis on community. I think there's a lot of knowledge to be shared, and you
Mhm.
can do that by like reading a plaque at at an aquarium or something. But connecting with other humans,
Mhm.
I don't know, there's something more like special about that it feels like we're all part of the same planet, which we are.
Mhm. And I think it helps kind of elevate that everybody has an important role and something to contribute. Like if you're a community member, it's important for you to come share, like, what is your experience? What are you seeing at your local parks? Like, do you have ideas for how we can, help protect and improve our natural areas? So it's not just like the shed expert is coming in and telling everyone how we're going to fix this. It really takes everybody, bringing their different ideas and lived experience together.
Hmm, so cool. Have you seen how like the kayak program that I touched on in the intro, or some of these other ones, the beach cleanups?
Yeah.
Have you seen this shift to the perception of people, like and their role in conservation? Is there anything that comes to mind there? Any stories or?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about the kayak program that you referenced. We've
Yeah.
been hosting it since 2018. It's called Kayak for Conservation, and we bring people out on the Chicago River, and we bring them out to kayak and kind of learn about conservation projects. But before we even go out on the water, we ask people like, "What is your perception of the Chicago River?" Even for people who aren't from Chicago, might have a little sense of the river having been a dumping grounds. And for those in Chicago, they often think of the river as being, kind of dirty, smelly, something that is dyed green every year for St. Patrick's Day, which is kind of,
Yeah.
a fun tradition, but is also something that kind of, I think, makes people think that the river isn't a wild, natural, like living environment. So we ask people up front, about their perceptions of the river, and that's a lot of what we get is just kind of those like negative perceptions. But we we get out and start kayaking on the river, and we are like close to downtown. We're about a mile north of downtown as part of this program. So you have skyscrapers surrounding the area and all this cool, buildings and development. But we paddle just about a half mile to the stretch of the river that we're working with partner organizations to restore. It's called the Wild Mile, and we are adding floating wetlands in this area. They're
Oh,
kind of
wow.
these man-made structures that add like greenery and kind of soften the edge of the river where it's otherwise steel walls. And over the last several years, we've been seeing so much wildlife coming back to this area. Beavers, herons, turtles, like snapping turtles, and all sorts of fish. And we see a lot of that as part of these paddles. So it does really, I think, help us understand and start kind of spark some imagination about how can we keep developing these areas that we do have, our city and our kind of bustling urban space, but also make space for wildlife as well.
Yeah.
And so, when we get out of the kayaks at the end of the program and we ask people again, now what do you think about the river? Or what did you experience? And just to hear them kind of share some of these reflections and how it really does, shift their thinking around there are parts of the river that still need to be cleaned up, but over many decades, it's so much cleaner. People have been doing so much work to invest in it. So I think it really just kind of shows that sense of change and that this is possible. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really inspiring for people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm inspired. When you're painting that picture of like the steel walls and the Chicago River, and I forgot about the dyeing it green part. You're right.
Yeah.
It just seems like I don't know, like a gutter or something, like a giant,
Right.
just like nothing. And then to share that all these amazing animals live there, and that you're quantifying that they're actually coming back is
Mhm.
really incredible.
Right.
And so your role at Shedd is this external community engagement and
Mhm.
creating ripples out to the people who live in and around Chicago, or even visitors. Shedd is
Mhm.
such a famous aquarium, but you're
Mhm.
also focused a lot internally. And so how are you building like a climate minded community inside the organization?
Right. Yeah. So again, conservation at Shedd happens across really every department. Like we need everyone at Shedd to both, see their role in, advancing our conservation mission. So even though my team gets to be, out in nature and gets to, really see some like direct environmental improvements, everyone at the aquarium plays a really important role in, kind of living this out every day. And a lot of departments at Shedd specifically are communicators, are programmers, and work with teachers or run our social media accounts and so many things like that. So one role that I've been playing is helping to kind of coordinate efforts across all of these teams, so that we are aligning messaging, we're aligning strategy, even though so we can have kind of the same type of philosophy, just as we've been talking about here about, how are we building community, building
Yeah.
optimism. So I've been working on a couple of different internal working groups at Shedd so that we can do more collaborative planning and make sure that we're on the same page so that even if you are, working with teens versus a corporate partner, that we're
Mm.
kind of on the same page about, moving all of our work forward in and trying to be effective with our conservation goals.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Wait, your role reminds me a little bit about how green teams in some corporations
Mhm.
operate. Like the green
Mhm.
team is incredible in that they can help kind of corral all these ideas and push for movement, but without the participation of like everybody else in the organization, it's not going to get as far. So this internal evangelist role it's really important, and I love to hear your stories about it.
I think that's a good example. And you're right. Using that word evangelist is important. I think often it's helpful when we do kind of centralize some of this. And for the people who are passionate and want to be an advocate, they can take that back to their own department and, make sure that the systemic change is there.
Yeah.
Um, One of the newer working groups that I started in 2024 is around climate change education specifically. So I recruited a few colleagues in teams like our conservation research team, our development team, our public engagement and animal care teams. And we meet regularly to develop offerings for all Shedd staff and volunteers, specifically around climate change. And what we're doing is trying to build more like literacy around climate science so that we can help teams understand how they can take action in their own different ways. So all those teams have such different roles.
Yeah.
But we're trying to, again, just kind of encourage more conversation around climate change, because that's really what it's about right now with climate change, is talking about it so that people have it top of mind and are, finding things to collaborate together around.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And you're also you've partnered with restaurants and bars and even your gift shop vendors to reduce plastic use.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about Shedd's collaboration with these local businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned we've been doing beach cleanups for many, many years. And, you get to a point where you're like, are we ever going to be able to stop this? What does it look like to, cut back on beach cleanups? And so, of course, the goal is to move upstream and cut off the source of the trash that's ending up in our waterways.
It makes sense. And I don't think a lot of people think that way. So kudos for that initial thought. That's great.
Yeah, it can be, I think that for folks, even just volunteers who do join a beach cleanup, you end up seeing the kind of items that we find when we're doing a beach cleanup. And we also tally and keep track of the data and report that to another advocacy organization that kind of works on broader Great Lakes region policy change. And what we're seeing is over 80% of the trash collected around Great Lakes beach cleanups is plastic. And a large majority of it is related to food packaging. So when we looked at that data, we were able to say, like, okay, so where's the food packaging come from? It's coming from some of us if we litter or if things get blown out of our trash cans. But it also can come from like food service. And, especially around the last 5 years with COVID, there has been, increasing amounts of disposable packaging that was used. And so it was a good opportunity even before COVID and in that time to reflect on what's going on with restaurants and how can we support restaurants in reducing the plastic that they use. At the very least, we're working with them to only give things like straws or plastic cutlery on request, or if they can switch to reusables, that's even better. So we have a program called Let's Shed Plastic, and we have, how many do we have? Maybe around 150 restaurants that have signed on to say they want to work with us to reduce their plastic use. And so we have resources and fun events and marketing opportunities so we can kind of highlight them and kind of brag about their sustainability efforts so that we can, shine some good light on them.
Oh, that's so cool. What's been most surprising or inspiring about some of these collaborations that you've seen?
It's cool to just hear from individuals who work at restaurants or cafes. I think, again, back to the piece of sometimes that you need like an advocate who is kind of that person who goes in and wants to disrupt things a little bit. One of our partners is a coffee shop called Necessary and Sufficient Coffee. And the owner is just such an advocate and is so excited about kind of reconsidering what a coffee shop needs to be. And she's trying to build into her cafes. So I think for us, we don't necessarily have to be the ones with all of the answers as the aquarium. We're trying to kind of be, a convener and provide resources from, other organizations or, whether it's policymakers that we're kind of connecting them with so we can be connectors. But, a lot of these folks working in their industry, they know what the best solutions are. And we want to, provide additional support and uplift them where we can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also by talking about these issues and by coming together with the other businesses in your neighborhood, and like this coffee shop example, they might already have all the great ideas, but maybe, the burger shop down the road doesn't have them all. So how can you cross-pollinative ideas and bring everybody together for that collective action, whether, like you said, like for policy change or otherwise?
it's hard for an individual restaurant or business to like change the system. And so if we can help to create that network where they have a shared voice,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're working towards. And yeah, we've had some momentum, but there's a lot of room still. And an interesting role that Shedd plays too, since we're a public facing organization and people know us as kind of like an educational institution. We also want to help educate those consumers to make it a bit easier for the business. So if we can, talk about how great reuse is and help people understand how reuse can kind of be built into our food service, that can make it a bit easier for those businesses that might be trying to make changes. If we can help consumers kind of start envisioning like a new future, more sustainable processes.
Yeah. Yeah. And those partnerships that Shedd's a part of goes beyond, again, the community, but you're also part of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. Did I get that right?
You did. Yeah.
Okay. And so how does partnering with other aquariums help amplify your impact?
Yeah, this is a great opportunity for us to leverage kind of similar expertise, similar priorities. And so with this group, which I don't know the last count, it's around 25 aquariums that are part of this network across North America. And this group works together on federal policy change, even international, and aligning kind of around shared conservation priorities.
Okay, so when you're tackling something huge like biodiversity loss and climate change, how do
Mm-hmm.
you start to like figure out where you're going to make an impact at Shedd? Where do you even start? It can be overwhelming.
It can. And I think that my inclination also is to like dream big and, go for kind of like the broadest impact. But I think it is also important for us to, recognize what people look to us for and what our kind of greatest strengths are. Shedd Aquarium in particular, we're the biggest aquarium kind of in the middle of the country and on the Great Lakes. We play an especially important role in being a voice and an advocate for freshwater conservation. And I think hopefully, in coming years, I think there's going to be a lot more focus on freshwater conservation. There's not a lot of understanding or sense of urgency, but there are a lot of, really critical freshwater environmental issues that we need to address. I think folks are maybe a little bit tuned in more to a lot of ocean conservation issues. And so for Shedd, we can recognize just the role and the opportunity for us to kind of be spokespeople for the Great Lakes and for freshwater species. And so I think that's one example, when I think about it's like biodiversity, but then if we can shrink it down a little bit to say, we really want to advocate for freshwater. We're doing a lot right now, especially around wetland protection and wetland conservation, including one of our Action Day sites, two of them. We have volunteers come out and do some wetland restoration, and we get to talk about kind of the importance of resilient, healthy wetlands as part of our, kind of climate resilient future.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess instead of tackling all of climate change and all biodiversity, what you're saying is Shedd's looking at where are you uniquely positioned to be able to offer the greatest impact. And because of the geographic location of Shedd being Chicago, Great Lakes area, Great Lakes freshwater, typically neglected or thought secondly to the ocean, you can shine a light there and really start protecting and conserving those habitats.
That's exactly it. And we do have some of our programs that, are marine and happen, in the ocean as well. So we do have kind of a global reach, but I think we are leaning into a lot of that freshwater focus. And so if that kind of helps guide a little bit of priority, then the next step would be looking at, what are the tools and resources and expertise that we have. We have a whole team of researchers that are PhD scientists who help study both at the aquarium and in the field, things like animal biology, population dynamics. We also have a lot of expertise at Shedd around sustainable operations. So even just at the aquarium, we're working on reducing our energy waste and water and being kind of the most sustainable that we can be as well. So these kind of different approaches that we can have where it's like leaning into the different expertise and things that we have as an aquarium.
Yeah. And so, what advice do you have for others who might be looking to integrate climate action across teams in their own organizations?
In a lot of ways, I feel like my role is unique. So a lot of the things we've talked about, it's like, I know not everyone is going to get out to go, do habitat restoration, but actually even that, now that I say that, I would encourage, people to get out to volunteer. And we offer a lot of corporate work days. So if that's something that folks want to, get their coworkers together, even if it's maybe adjacent to your actual job function, it's a great opportunity to connect with your coworkers and kind of give back to your community and your environment. So I'd encourage people to get out to volunteer. One of the other things that I was doing this past year as part of our climate change education within Shedd is I hosted a few climate cafes. And if you look up climate cafes, this is a whole kind of program. So I got a couple of resources when I looked it up about how to host these at my workplace. But anybody can do it, and it's the intention to get people together within your community. It could be coworkers, neighbors, family, friends, and pick maybe like a subtopic within climate and bring people together to discuss that, and maybe kind of hear from people what their concerns are, their questions. And so we hosted 3 of them in 2024. They were a great chance for people to kind of come together and just process, I think, some of their feelings and questions and think about some next steps. And people were sharing resources. And I think that's something that anybody can do to find, a spark and see, what opportunities might come from that.
Climate cafes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll include a link in the show notes so people can self-organize. I love that idea.
Yeah. That sounds good.
And as far as skills you've developed over the years, what do you think is essential for making an impact in this field?
Mm-hmm. When it comes to making an impact with climate change, I think something that I've been honing for myself is kind of like a sense of informed optimism. I'm trying to think of kind of like the right term, like how to frame it, because I feel like I'm a very optimistic person, but I don't think that I'm just blindly optimistic and just sort of, ignoring the reality of the situation. What really inspires me is to look at the success stories that I've been seeing around climate change or around some of these other, major environmental issues that we're faced with. Just yesterday, I was in another presentation listening to somebody talk about, in kind of the 90s, the story of tackling the ozone, the hole in the ozone. And this was something that internationally governments came together and said, okay, we're going to make policy changes. We're going to, I don't remember the name of the chemical that was really contributing to it, but it was something that, everyone had to commit to make that change. And that ozone issue the hole has majorly shrunk, and that issue has largely, kind of moved on. Like, it's not as much of an issue. At the time, it seemed massive. Folks came together and were able to make that change. So I do think in the sense of, having optimism, but doing that in a way where you can, look at success stories and understand what made those successful and try to replicate that. And, there's a lot to be concerned about, and we should be concerned. And I hope that we can use that concern to find those opportunities and work together.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because especially right now in the face of all the fires in Southern California and everything else going on across the world, it can be really easy to get sucked into a state of despair and depression. And recognizing this is a great example you've mentioned on the ozone piece. Like, we can come together, we can all take action, and we can make a difference. We just need to be motivated to do it, and you get that motivation by talking about it, by educating yourself, by educating others, by bringing community together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I love it. So, for somebody listening who wants to make a difference, what's your advice for finding their climate superpower?
I love that question. And I do think that everybody has a climate superpower. We are all change makers. But I also know we all have, different strengths and interests to bring to the table. And I think it's really important for each of us to not try to be someone we're not when it comes to, finding our climate superpower. So I would like to recommend a wonderful book that came out recently called, I have it right here, it's What If We Get It Right? This book by Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. She includes a tool in this book that she's been talking about for many years before she even, put the recent book out. It's a Venn diagram that asks you to answer 3 questions. The questions are, what work needs to be done? What are you good at? And what brings you joy? And if you can answer those 3 questions and kind of find what's at the intersection within that, that's where you can find your climate superpower. If it doesn't bring you joy, you're not going to want to do it. If it doesn't need to be done, you're not going to really be effective at making a change. And if you're not good at it, that's not really playing into what your strengths are. So I think everything I got to talk about today and what my role is, I think that my superpower is in like activating people together to take action. And I'm really grateful that I get to do that as part of kind of my day job. But I think even outside of a day job, looking for that climate superpower, if you love gardening, finding a way to do that in a way that is supporting a healthy planet. If you love protesting and connecting with people around activism, that's a very different skill set that other folks might be better at stepping into. And it takes all of those different superpowers.
Yeah, I think that's like the Ikigai model of those intersections of the 3 things.
Yeah,
I love it. I love applying that.
I'm familiar with that, but exactly. And this is just an application to talk about the climate piece.
Yes, and we'll put a link to the book in the show notes as well.
Great.
If there's one story from work that you'll carry with you forever, what do you think that'll be?
One story from work. I'm thinking about the young people that I get to watch connect to nature. A couple of years ago, we started working on the South Branch of the Chicago River. So while we've been doing much more restoration on the North Branch and the Wild Mile, where we do our kayaking program, there's another part of the river on Chicago's southwest side where there is far less access to green space, and the river in that area is actually closer to that like legacy polluted part of the river called Bubbly Creek. And it's called that because in the early 1900s, like carcasses from stockyards were dumped into the river, and as they rotted, they would bubble up. So, like, not the cutest,
quite a picture. Yeah,
kind of. But I'm thinking about a couple of years ago when we started doing some more like nature programming and started doing some river conservation work, and I'm like, I can picture some of the kids who joined us to go fishing. And the thrill of their face, even just in casting a line and getting to be a person who fishes and connects to the river and spends time on the river, is just really, that sticks with me. We have had kids also catch fish, like sunfish. And so they get to actually see that like the river's alive. There are things in there. They get to experience it in that way of, usually whatever's under the river is kind of a mystery. And so to have the opportunity to kind of bring it to life and give them some skills to go fishing with us and hopefully do that more in the future is, I think, just something I feel really grateful to be part of, kind of helping to facilitate those experiences.
Yeah, that's what a beautiful story. And, personally, I wouldn't have imagined a fishing story connecting one to nature or conservation because, you're fishing a fish, but like you said, it's a mystery under there. So if it's giving a little bit of perspective that there is life here, that shifts the view for these kids who are going to grow up and make their own decisions in how they want to be stewards of the planet. So, but what a different way to think about things. Thank you for that perspective.
Yeah, of course. It's fun.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, Jaclyn?
I'm just excited to, this is such a cool concept around every job being a climate job. So, I am grateful to get to share about how aquariums plug into that, how just an excitement around animals and wildlife and nature plugs into, our more resilient climate future. So I'm just excited to, see who else you get to talk to, what other stories you pull out of people. And I do hope that this just sparks more conversation with folks that everyone can start asking this question of like, how can my job be a climate job? And I'm just, grateful for the chance to share my story.
I love how Jaclyn gets people to see nature where they didn't before. The Chicago River isn't just a place that gets dyed green for St. Patrick's Day. It's a habitat, and it's coming back to life. And that question she asked, what's your climate superpower? Well, that's something to sit with. You don't have to be a conservationist to make a difference. Maybe you run events and you can make them zero waste. Or maybe you work in finance and you can push for sustainable investments. Whatever it is, start with where you are. If this episode got you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me at anyjobcanbeaclimatejob@gmail.com or leave a review. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.